Every visionary has a story to tell. These stories educate and inspire us all.
You could hear them cranking up in the morning and hear the click, click, click of the roller coaster.
It's really feeling satisfied and feeling gratified with bringing happiness to young children, especially families.
Working with people who are having a good time is so much better than any other job.
Join us as we learn from these trailblazers.
I grew up in a family business. It was called Nellie Bly Park, and it was in Brooklyn, New York. The park was started in 1969. It was a small park, and it was geared to smaller children. We tried to push up, into the early teens and everything, but it was just I always like to call it a sweet kind of little country park in the middle of the city. We had a petting farm. There were a lot of trees, a lot of landscaping. Even though it was only on under 4 acres of land, there was like wide areas to walk around in which people really liked. A train ride that, went through near the petting farm, through a tunnel, kinds of things you would find in a little country park. The biggest thing I did was painting because I was an art major. I did a lot of artwork, so I was always painting carousel horses or scenery or little signs and props for the park, things like that. And then when I was a teenager, I remember thinking that my parents just wanted to keep me under their nose, but I realized as I got more involved in the business that you just always need an extra hand in a family park. So you do whatever you had to do, sell cotton candy, work behind the snack bar, run rides, take care of the petting, whatever it is you had to do, go behind the game. And that continued through my whole career in the park. Even when I became president of the park, if they need you to pitch in somewhere and there's a line, that's where you have to go. One thing was that we were in a very blue-collar area. We were we couldn't price. We had to be very careful on our pricing. We had to try to keep it, low for the community that we were in. So that was always a challenge, how to, make it affordable for the community. I'd have to say the biggest challenge was that we were owned by the city, the city of New York. Basically, they owned the property, and we were almost what you would call like a giant hot dog stand, the concessionaire of the city of New York. So they had a say over everything we did. And if they said they wanted X amount of money in capital improvements, we had to kind of comply to it, but then they would own it. Anything we did like that, they would own. So that was a real challenge, because when you have a park like that, what people really want is new equipment and new rides and change, but we were always having to make the city happy with paving parking lights and putting new piping in or lights or things which you need, but the public really wants to see more and different kinds of entertainment. My father started going to the conventions almost as soon as he got into the business, and he started to go when they were still in Chicago, and he became hooked right away. He said it was like a kid going to a candy store. You just wanted to get a piece of everything and get everything and put it in the park. And then when they started moving around, I started going, and I was probably about in my early teens, 13 or 14, when I started to go, and I've only missed one convention since. And at that time, for us, the great thing was not only getting ideas, because we were totally new to the business, but the camaraderie of being with other people that were in the business. Of course, the shows were much smaller. You really got to know people. I think you still do, but we made a lot of very close personal and business friends through those years going to those shows. So that was the big draw at the beginning. I started to get interested because I'm a joiner, one of those type people, in working on some committees and things. So I got into some committees, and at the time, it was primarily all men that were almost on all the committees, on all the boards or anything they were doing, even ad hoc things. There were a few women involved, but very, very few, and they were usually in a support role. So the people in the association really courted me too. They made it very comfortable and easy for me to get involved. I didn't have to try too hard to get on a committee or anything. And then it was at a time where more and more women were getting in the business. So it wasn't just myself, but more women were getting on committees and things like that. And then at a certain point, my father got a phone call. They must have discussed it, the nominating committee, because I knew nothing about it. And he said that Tom Wages, who was president at the time of the association, called him and said, "Gene, we want to ask," he asked my father first. It's funny, I almost like my hand in marriage. Yeah. But I think it was to be respectful to my father, because they were asking me and not him. But I know they were trying to get women involved, and that was probably the major reason. And I was, doing work for, I actually, worked on committees, whereas my father hadn't. So they were getting to know me better too. And he said, "We'd like to ask Gina to be on the board of directors, or nominate her for the board of directors." And he was just thrilled about it, my father. So I got the nomination. I was elected by the nominating committee, and I was probably the first not woman on the board, but the first active woman on the board. And Boyd Jensen was president when I became, my first time I was on the board, and I was the only woman. And I remember going to my hotel room, and I was scared out of my mind. I mean, I was like, what am I going to do? Sitting with all these big wigs, from around the world and everything, and here I am. He called me the morning of the board meeting, and he said, "Gina, would you like to have breakfast with me?" And that just broke it all down for me. And we had breakfast together, and after that, it was a piece of cake. But I just thought, what a great thing for him to even think of, to do, because he must have imagined what it was like for me. If you look then and now, there were women that were managing parks, there are CEOs, there are a lot of division managers and everything now. Certainly online managers, and I hoped, and I always think to myself, if I did one thing to help change the world, it was that I did become president of IAAPA. And I wanted to do it because I love the industry and I love the association. But being the first woman president was no small meaning to me. It held a big meaning for me. The biggest dramatic change is the evolution of the corporate park. That when we first came into the industry, everybody was like us, all these family-owned, individual type parks. They were all different sizes, from small ones like ours to mid-sized to big ones, which have now been bought out, by people like Six Flags and Paramount. But they were individually owned at that time, and many of them by families. So I would say that was the biggest change, was the evolution of the corporate park. When I became president, I remember a lot of small parks, because that was when the industry was, changing a lot, corporate parks and everything. But they felt they had representation again. They felt that the association was acknowledging a really small park person again. And yeah, there was quite a bit of significance in it. And I paid a lot of attention to trying to make every member feel important in some way. I mean, if I had to go to cocktail parties and I remember going to one cocktail party and seeing these guys from Africa over in one corner. They didn't know anybody, but I made sure I went over to them and welcomed them to the association, and found out about them a little and told them, what was there for them and everything. You got to meet all these people from around the world in the same industry, and go to all these different places through the trips and travel, and hear about how they do business, and that to me was one of the biggest draws. The merry-go-round to me is the most magical thing in the world. It's not the most exciting ride, that's another answer, but if I have to say my favorite ride, just to watch children on it, I mean the joy that, and you can have a merry-go-round by itself anywhere, and it's almost like you have everything for a whole amusement park. Right. And you can't do that with another ride. It's only the merry-go-round that you can do that with. They're beautiful to look at. I mean, to me, they're art pieces. Depending on how fast they go and who they're for, there's a little bit of thrill involved, but there's just something magical about the merry-go-round that I think nothing else has. Jeffrey Thompson was a big influence because he really got the idea of fun, that it was a fun business and you better be thinking of fun and entertainment. That's what it's about, that's your product. They were so great to be around. It's an industry of life and happiness. I remember one day just looking around, and all the activity and the colors and children, and people basically being happy. I mean, it has its set of problems on one side, but I think the biggest appeal to me was that it's just an industry that's vibrant with life and that it's a renaissance industry, that it involves so many different types of things, types of crafts and work and mechanical things, everything from human relations to design and creation and guest service, you name it. I hope I'll always be a part of it. It's been a joy to be part of all my life. The people in it are great. And now that I have children, to see it from the other perspective of, spending a day in an amusement park and how much fun it is and what a great way it is to spend time with your kids and everything. And just one thing I love about it is the pure fun of it. It's pure fun, and there's very little of that in most things.